Hi guys, my name is Merrie and welcome to my Kawaii world. So May is Asian American Heritage Month and I just thought I would make a video talking about what it means to me to be Asian American. So I am living in Korea right now, and prior to this I lived in Japan, but before that I pretty much lived my entire life in the US. I was born in California and I grew up there, and then when I went to graduate school I lived in New York, and then after that I lived in Washington DC. So I'm American. I was born there, and living overseas has really made me aware that I am American and I'm not so much Japanese or Korean. My mom is Japanese and my dad is Korean, so I'm half Japanese and half Korean. I'm fourth generation on my Japanese side, and I think second generation on my Korean side. My mom was born in Utah and her parents came from Utah and Canada, and it was my great-grandparents that emigrated to North America from Japan. And my great-grandfather came to Canada because he was the second son in his family and he wasn't going to inherit any property. He was a samurai who was honorably discharged from the Russo-Japanese War, and then he moved to Canada to work on a farm basically. My great-grandmother used to work as a seamstress for the imperial family in Japan. She married my great-grandfather without knowing him, moved to Canada, and they had 9 children. My grandma was the second oldest in her family, and so yeah, she was that's like kind of a little bit about my Japanese side. Actually, that could be an entirely separate video on its own. My grandma wrote her history, which is why I know so much about that side of the family. On my dad's side, my family is actually from North Korea, not South Korea. My dad was born in South Korea, but my grandparents grew up in North Korea, and before the Korean War they walked from North Korea, from Pyongyang to South Korea, to Busan. And at the time they had 3 children, my oldest uncle, my aunt, and she was a baby, and then there was a middle child, a son. And they couldn't take all of their children with them because they had to walk. So I think my uncle was like 5 or 6 years old. My aunt was an infant, and then the middle son was about 3 years old, and they made a tough decision to leave him with their family in North Korea with the intention of coming back to get him, and they never were able to get him. They walked to South Korea. They stayed in Busan for a while, and then after the war was over they moved to Seoul, and that's where my dad was born. And then in the 70s my dad's side of the family emigrated to the United States, and they settled in California, and that's where he met my mom. So I grew up not really speaking any Japanese. My parents spoke English to one another because that was the language that they had in common. And I know some Korean because my grandma used to take care of me when I was a baby, and she spoke Korean to me. So I was able to speak Korean at the level of like a child. I can understand more than I could speak. As far as Japanese goes, I had to learn from scratch basically, and I studied using Japanese Pod 101, but really my mom doesn't speak Japanese. My grandma has passed away, and so really like nobody in my family speaks Japanese anymore. So a lot of times people are really surprised when I tell them that I'm half Japanese and half Korean, because like there's a lot of animosity between the two cultures because of the Japanese colonization of Korea. My mom got remarried to a Japanese guy. My dad got remarried to a Korean woman, and they are still married to their respective partners to this day. So I grew up in a suburb of Los Angeles, and in my suburb there were a lot of Asian people. So I never felt like I was the minority. I was always in the majority. When I was in junior high school, my mom got remarried, and I moved to Simi Valley, which, if you guys are familiar with that place at all, it's in Ventura County. There are very few minorities that live there. I was probably like one of 5 or 6 Asians in my entire junior high school. I don't ever remember being discriminated against or being treated differently because of my race. I feel like people were generally really nice to me, and I think at the time I wasn't so concerned about what was going on there as what was going on with my friends back home. And I was going through a lot of changes, getting used to a new stepfather and just living in a new neighborhood. So race was like the least of my concerns at the time. Throughout my life, I did go to a Japanese American Buddhist temple, and that's where a lot of my friends were, and I had a really close group of friends who I played basketball with, I went to Girl Scouts with, and I went to church with, and so everyone there was Japanese, and I always felt a little self-conscious because I was half Korean and I didn't have a Japanese last name like my friends did. Because my mom pretty much raised me after my parents got a divorce, I always felt like I was more Japanese than Korean, and I always related more to that side of myself. So nowadays you see mixed race Asians all the time, but when I was growing up, I felt like I was the only person who was, besides my brother and sister, I felt like I was the only person who was not full Japanese or not full Korean. You would see a lot of Hapa kids who are half white and half Japanese, but you would never see like half Japanese, half Korean, or half Chinese, half Japanese kids. I feel like I was the only one, but I just wanted to kind of assimilate and be like just like my friends, but I was just different. So the first time that I actually experienced overt racial discrimination was when I studied abroad in Spain. So when I was a junior in college, I studied abroad in Barcelona for a year, and like when I was just walking down the street, I would hear people yelling out at me, "Chinita, ching 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 ching," and like that was the first time that I heard people saying that kind of stuff to me, and I just kind of brushed it off my shoulder as ignorance on their part, because there were not a lot of Asians in Barcelona at that time, and maybe the world is a little different now because of bloggers like Amisog and Criselim, but at the time I felt a lot of discrimination in Spain, and even among my Spanish friends, they would call me Chinita, which is like Chinese girl, but in an affectionate way, and that was kind of annoying on many levels because number one, I'm not Chinese, but I didn't really bother to correct them. I probably should have, looking back, but I don't think that I had the vocabulary to explain that to them in Spanish. Maybe I should have. So after I graduated from college, I went to graduate school in New York, and this is where I started to meet other Asians who did not come from California. Now this is kind of a generalization, but I noticed that there was a difference between East Coast Asians and Asians who grew up in California. For one thing, I felt like the East Coast Asians had experienced a lot more discrimination growing up, like overt discrimination, and so that kind of impacted how they saw the world, and they took racial issues a lot more seriously. They were probably a lot more politically correct than I was. Asian Americans are not all the same. If you grew up in Southern California, you're different from the NorCal Asians, and the East Coast Asians are different from the West Coast Asians. So it wasn't until I moved to Asia as an adult that I really became hyper aware of my identity as an Asian American. My parents did not seem to have that immigrant mentality that a lot of Asian parents have. And my mom is definitely not a tiger mom. She still had high expectations for me. She cared a lot about me, but yeah, she's not like the Joy Luck Club mom in any way whatsoever. So my first experience living in Asia was living in Japan, and while I was there, I could see little characteristics that my grandma had taken from like her mom who came from Japan. So for example, when I went to visit my grandma in Utah and we would go snowboarding, she would always pack us a little bento lunch, which would be rice balls and some sandwiches and some homemade cookies. And I always kind of thought like, I wish grandma wouldn't pack us a lunch so I could just buy lunch at the cafeteria, which would be like chili and fries and just junk food. When I moved to Japan, I noticed going to the parks that all the old, not even the old people, everybody would bring their bento lunch, which is just like a little lunchbox with rice and vegetables and meat, just something really healthy. And I thought, I saw these older obachans sitting and chatting and eating their obentos together, and I thought, wow, my grandma would fit right in with those ladies. So just little things like that, I could see where my Japanese culture came from. But as much as I could see those kinds of traits within my family, I knew that I would never be Japanese. I didn't really belong there. I had a different way of thinking about like society and individualism, just a completely different culture. And I just never felt like I was Japanese. And the same thing with Korea. Like even though I can see traits of my Korean side here in Korea, I just don't feel Korean, and I know that even if I live here for like 10 years, I will never truly belong. I will always be American. And I don't really know why that is, but I just know that I don't belong here. So living overseas has actually made me feel a lot more patriotic and a lot more American and a lot more grateful for like my country. And when I hear the national anthem, I might tear up a little bit. In that way, like I feel like living overseas has made me closer to being American. So I'm glad that I can always go back to the US, and I do plan to go back someday. I can't live overseas forever. It's a lot of fun because I know that I'm only here temporarily, but I could never see myself living here for the rest of my life. So with all of the changes that have been going on in our country, it really made me think about like who I was and what I valued as an American. Like when Donald Trump got elected in 2017, I thought that there was a real possibility that all of the Koreans could be rounded up and put into like concentration camps or detainment centers, what they did with the Japanese Americans during World War II. Like I thought that there was a real possibility that we could be going down that route, and I thought, what would I do? Would I stay and would I fight for our country and what it stands for, or would I escape to Canada? And so my husband thought I was crazy when I was talking about this. Maybe I was, but I don't know, I feel like it was a real possibility. And I thought, like, what would I do? Would I stand here and fight for democracy and liberty and justice and freedom and all of those good things that our country stands for, or would I just run away? And I think that if there are enough people that believe in those values, those truly American values, then we have to stay and we have to fight and we have to make our country what it's supposed to be, not a place of hatred and discrimination and that type of thing. So if we stay and we work together, then maybe we can fix things. All of this is just so theoretical, but I just truly feel like I am half Japanese and half Korean, but at my heart, I'm American. I can't imagine being any other nationality. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments what you guys think, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye!